Okay, so we'll make a start. So this evening we are joined by Father Luke Bell, who is a Benedictine monk of Quarr Abbey on the Isle of Wight here in the UK. He is a graduate of Cambridge University and the author of half a dozen books on Christian spirituality. In recent years, he runs the internship program for young men at Quarr Abbey. The title of his talk is Hidden with Christ, the Reality Beyond the Visible and the Benedictine Tradition. So, Father Luke.
Thank you, Adam. We were trying to remember the title earlier, so it's good to be reminded. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Some of you, of course, I know very well from being interns and other visitors to our abbey. I'd like to send a greeting to the people who are with us through the technology. In the technology, we're only virtually connected, but in Christ, we're really connected. And that's outside of time. So it doesn't matter when you're watching this. You're very welcome here. Just a word about Adam, since he spoke about me. I remember Adam for two things. One was spotting a Soviet tractor, and the other was turning a trolley that had become a parallelogram into something rectilinear and functional. I'm afraid it's gone back to its old ways a bit now, so please come back soon. We need you. So I've been asked to talk about Benedictine life. It's exactly a week since we had a new Holy Father. I was very moved by that. He's a member of religious order too, the Order of St. Augustine, and that gives a very special character to his pontificate, a person I feel very warmly about. OSB is a little different from OSA. OSA has quite an outreach element to it, quite a mobile element to it. OSB is about being stable. We actually take a vow of stability, staying in the same place. It's a somewhat hidden life, and also it's fundamentally it's a silent life. Obviously, we worship and we do talk, but the heart of it really is silence, which puts me in a very embarrassing position because I have traveled to be here. I am speaking in public about the hidden life, and perhaps worst of all, I'm staining the silence with my speech. So I do ask your understanding of the awkwardness of my position, coming here to talk about what is essentially a hidden thing. It's a thing hidden with Christ in God, which is the short title of the talk today. And the long title is, I've got it written down so I don't forget it, The Reality Beyond the Visible and the Benedictine Tradition. I want to say at the outset that it includes every Christian life, really, because the Benedictine tradition is just an early and perhaps particularly focused way of living the Christian life. And that's manifest in the context of that quote from third chapter of St. Paul's letter to Colossians. You have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. And that's a reference to baptism, and the waters of baptism are death to the world in the sense of no longer being addicted to the things of this world, in the sense of being free, because our true life is with Christ in God, and no one can take us away from that. In the Benedictine life, we mark this being separated from the world with our vows, stability and obedience and conversion of life. And that's a way of making explicit what probably we weren't very likely conscious enough to be able to do when we were baptized. We're saying, I'm leaving behind what belongs to this world, or I press on towards what is above, towards what is actually invisible. And I want to do two things. I want to describe the difference between the visible and the invisible. And then I want to say how Benedictine life in particular allows us access to the invisible. Now, the way to understand the difference between the visible and the invisible is again given to us by St. Paul. And he says quite simply that the things which are seen are temporal, and the things which are not seen are eternal. To put that simply, what's invisible is more real, it's more true. Now, the Greek word for truth, as you know, is aletheia, meaning that which is separate from lethe, that which isn't swallowed up by forgetfulness. So in the Orthodox tradition, they talk about eternal memory, meaning that that life is true, that life goes beyond what changes and what is forgotten. Now, the temporal life is the one that we're used to. William Blake talks about the five senses being the usual connection that we make with what's outside of us in this life, in this age. But it's not a connection with what is most real. And there are indications of that. The temporal life has got three characteristics, really. It's lived in time. I'm going to go through these one by one. It's lived in space, and it's navigated by reason. Now, none of these is absolute, although they're often taken to be absolute. I'll take time, for instance, to begin with. I'll start with just a very simple anecdote, and this goes back a long, long time ago, when my mother had a dream, and she dreamt that there were 5 sugar lumps on the road. And you can see where this is going. The next day, she saw 5 sugar lumps on the road. I've had similar dreams, not of sugar lumps, I don't like sugar, but of other things, not necessarily significant, although perhaps 1 or 2 of them were. And then it's turned out the way I dreamt it would be, which rather suggests that at some level we are aware of what is beyond the present. Now, of course, we shouldn't try and find out the future in a necromancer sort of way. As Therese of Lisieux said, it's like meddling with creation to try and work out what is going to happen in the future, other than in a practical way, of course. But there are plenty of indications that there's not an absolute barrier between us and the future. I remember when I worked in a parish, there's a young mother there, an ordinary person, quite a few young children, who had a very vivid impression of what happened on the 11th of September in 2001 before it happened. A very powerful impression of that. And I think that's not at all uncommon. And then we've got prophecies in the Bible. We've got saints who've known what's going to happen. Very common is saints knowing when they're going to die. It's common in ordinary life, I think. There's many, many a tale. There's one in Alexander Navalny's extraordinary memoir, Patriot, of how he knew the moment he saw her that he was going to marry the woman that was to become his wife. He just knew that. And I think that's quite common. And it's not simply a matter of, I'm going to make this happen. It's an intuitive awareness that this is going to happen. So time is not an absolute, and nor is space. So there's various pointers to space not being absolute. In physics, you've got quantum entanglement. One particle can be very distant from another particle, and yet what happens to one will affect the other. And then you've got Bell's theorem. I take no credit for that, but Bell's theorem says that you cannot be both local and realistic, or to put it another way, the sense of it is that reality is non-local. It's not local. It's not limited by space. The fundamental reality is not limited by space. And if you think about it, that's what we talk about, the way we talk in religious language anyway. When the president of the Newman Society writes to me and says, yours in Christ, the logistics of space are not being considered in that ending to the letter, yours and Our Lady. Well, we're not spatial, essentially. We're beyond space, we're beyond time. And now the trickiest one is reason, because people are sort of attached to it. But reason deals with what is in time and space. So that's where the excluded middle comes from. If you are in one place, you cannot be in another place. If you live in one time, you cannot live in another time. But that does not apply where space and time do not apply. And very great and very influential thinker, Nicholas of Cusa, a cardinal, came up with this lapidary formulation of divinity. God is the coincidence of opposites. And to give just, I could talk at great length about that, but give you just one example. God is omnipotent. We sing that in the Creed. But on the cross, God is utterly powerless. Utterly powerless. Omnipotent and powerless. And there's many others. So beyond what reason can navigate, reason is for navigating time and space. And we need to go the other side of that wall, of Nicholas of Cusa says, if we're to know the divinity. So that's my starting point, that the invisible is relatively, the visible is relatively unreal. And the invisible is what is truly, what is eternally real. Well, of course, we live in time and space, and we live by reason. We think things through. We consult time tables. We even consult weather forecasts, although they've been very disappointing this week. Yet, there is a deeper reality. It's never even dark there, according to the book of Revelation. And there are no tears. And there's the river of life, and so on. Well, how do we become aware of that? Because it's perhaps not a common or general awareness. So I want to go through those three characteristics of living in the temporal, in the visible, and see how, through Christian life and Benedictine life in particular, we can come the other side of them. I'm going to go through them in reverse order, because time is the one I'm going to spend most time on. So start with reason, and then space, and then time. Now, when I walked into the Aula in Blackfriars earlier today, but by the way, it was very good to see so many of you there. I hope you realise that was the main feature. This is the B movie, secondary really to that. But as I walked into that Aula, the first book that caught my attention was by Ian McGilchrist, The Master and His Emissary. He was a Don at Oxford, taught English, specialised in romantic poetry. He retrained to become a psychiatrist and a brain scientist. And his work is so important. There's that book, The Master and His Emissary, and then the most recent book, The Matter with Things. There's both long books, lots and lots of references to scientific papers. But the thinking in it is so deep and so important that even if he doesn't get all the details of the application of what he's saying right, you cannot really not read them if you want to think seriously. I put it as strongly as that. Now, his research, I think we can talk about the science of this now, His research shows that the brain functions in two ways, two halves to the brain. There is the left-hand side of the brain, the left hemisphere of the brain, which is to do with making practical judgments, with mapping territory and navigating it. And the right side of the brain is to do with seeing the whole, seeing in the most important sense of the word, intuitively. Now, his thesis in the first book is that we've let the emissary take control of the master, so that we no longer are contemplating the whole, but are enthralled to the manipulative, and that's quite literal because that side of the brain controls the right hand, the manipulative side of our being, and we no longer what it is at the service of. Or as Pope Francis said in Laudate Si, we have too many means and not enough ends. We've lost our sense of purpose. We've lost the big picture. So how does Benedictine life come into this? Well, I'll tell you, there's many stories, but I'll just tell you one from that second very long book, The Matter with Things. And this is about somebody who worked with horses. I think his wife did too. I think they bred horses and they were seriously involved in horse racing. Well, they retired when they got older, and he would go along to races. They were still interested. And he'd watch the horses as they were preparing to run in the races. And he would actually know which one would win. And obviously you can monetize that sort of awareness. So that's what he did. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And it was only when he read The Master and His Emissary that he understood what was going on. When it didn't work, he had his son with him. He loved having his son with him. He was 14 years old and he enjoyed his company. So it wasn't about not liking it. And sometimes he would give his predictions over the phone to people who would react in some way. And on these occasions, his predictions were less good. And when he read McGilchrist's work, he realized that what he was doing was allowing his rational self to take over from his intuitive self. Intuitively, he knew, but once he started engaging with people about it, he was distracted from what he knew intuitively, and the results were not so good and not so profitable. Now, being a Benedictine monk is like betting the house on what your intuition says. It costs you everything, and you're betting on what you are aware of. And the awareness is of the whole picture, the whole beautiful symphony, whatever, and it's an awareness ultimately of God. And that's contemplative life. And that goes beyond what reasoning can do. That's the first escape from the visible. Contemplation, looking at the whole. Second one is space. Now with space, in order to escape, what the Benedictine does is to take a vow of stability. So we're saying, I'm not going to find my life in moving. Oh, it's really enjoyable to come to Oxford for the day, but fundamentally, I'm not going to find my life in moving about and seeking excitement in this world. And that monastery, in St. Bernard's telling, it's an image, an instantiation in Platonic terms, of the New Jerusalem, of the heavenly Jerusalem. It's a remembrance of the eternal stability of God, that Christ Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's a remembrance of that. Now, I need to just explain here that that's not contradicted by the more fluid life of Jesuits and friars who move about. because they are actually living the same truth in a different way. They're saying that God is eternal, and therefore we have no abiding city. So this world is relative. So the Benedictine life makes of one spot in this world an image of the eternal presence of God. Jesuit and Dominican life says that this life is not the final end, and shows that by moving about. We're both living by the eternal, what is fundamentally true, by reality. Peter Kingsley wrote a book called that, Reality, which is saying similar sorts of things. That's space. Now time. How do we escape time? There's a line from the Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot. Only through time, time is conquered. Only through time, time is conquered. That's quoted by the Canadian Catholic philosopher Charles Taylor in his recent book, Cosmic Connections, Poetry in the Age of Disenchantment. And he says some very interesting things about the use of time. This is a quotation from that book. There is duration without succession, the retaining of the past in the present in a quasi-simultaneity. This can be seen not as the disappearance of time, but as its higher intensification. This is one path to an experience of what we might be tempted to call eternity. I put that a bit more strongly. I would just leave it out. Might be tempted to. It's one path to an awareness, I would say, of eternity. And the key point there is the link between the past and the present. He describes that as a kind of force field. And he looks at the works of various German and French and English poets and how they capture that link, that what transcends time. But he also looks at the work of Proust, his book À la recherche du temps perdu, a very long novel about recapturing time. And in the final volume, which is called Le Temps retrouvé, Time Found Again, there is an evocation of particular experiences in the present that evoke an experience in the past. For example, the sounds of a hammer on the wheels of a halted train are recalled by the sound of a spoon knocked against a plate. And I quote Proust in the original here, talking about these links, and he says of them that they me donnent une joie pareille à une certitude insuffisante sans autre preuve à me rendre la mort indifférente, which means they give me a joy that is like and a certitude that's sufficient without any other proofs to make me indifferent to death. Or to put it another way, they put me in touch with eternity. There's a sense of what is beyond time in that linking. And we do that in a secular sort of way with things like remembering VE Day. That sort of lives in its being recalled because there's a connection between them that somehow stands away from time. Mere linearity is death, just one thing after another, no meaning. But if you link, then there is something beyond time that time expresses, but also conceals, that you somehow reach. Now, this is at its most climactic in the celebration of the Easter Vigil. So I'll quote some of the words that are used by the priest officiating. Christ, yesterday and today, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, all time belongs to him and all the ages. And then at Easter Day Mass, Christ, it says in the prayer, unlocked for us the path to eternity. So that is linking us with what is utterly timeless, the resurrection and resurrection life. Linking us in the Mass in a very real way, because we believe that Christ risen is present in the Mass and in the Eucharist, linking us also by linking moments in time, the historical moment of the resurrection, and now opening eternity to us. And that happens year by year. It happens because in the year the whole of the Christian mystery is lived through and evoked so that it becomes eternal. It happens week by week because there's that whole pattern which is focused on Sunday. And it happens for the Benedictine monk day by day because the offices during the day repeat each other, so that you could say that that life is one of continual praise, because Lord's praise is at the beginning, is pretty much always at the same time, and we're always praising God. 7 o'clock in the morning is, sorry, I'm going to Blackfriars tomorrow because you don't have Lord's here at 7, but 7 o'clock in the morning. Oh, you do? Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, well, good for you then. Oh. So there it is, eternal praise, because each time it's celebrated, another time is evoked, and then through time, what is beyond time is evoked. So the liturgy, in some sense, transcends time. Now, the rule of St. Benedict says nothing is to be preferred to the work of God, which is the liturgy. And it says that whatever you're doing, you should stop doing it when the bell goes and go for the worship without sort of pushing each other out of the way. You should make all decent haste to get to the church for the liturgy. So that is, through time, time is conquered, in T.S. Eliot's words. We're opening ourselves to an eternity. Now that's Benedictine, but it's also simply Christian, because going to Mass each Sunday does the same thing. That's the minimum for a Catholic Christian. But that in itself is already doing the same thing. And if you say some of the office, you're doing the same thing. If you say prayers at the same time of day each day, you're doing the same thing. You're transcending time. The big error is to be seduced by Scheherazade. If we could just make the Sultan the goody in that story. Do you know the story? 1001 Nights. There's this person who's normally got a bad press, who wants to chop off the head of the woman he's had the night before. And I don't know why he's got a bad press. But this clever one decides that she's going to tell him a story and just leave it suspended so that he doesn't know what's going to happen. And of course, she never gets her head cut off because he always wants to know what happens next. Now, if we recast her as the villain, then we see what a linear view of time is doing to us, that we're always forgetting what is real, what is most important. And advertising does that, and branding does that, as, for example, Next. That's an actual brand. There's an actual brand called Next. And we're being diverted away from eternity into time. And I suppose, having new versions of Windows is doing the same thing, isn't it, really? We're being diverted from eternity into time. And that's what advertising does. But liturgy does the opposite. Liturgy uses time to direct us to eternity. So it's a sort of opposite to advertising. So that's the work of God, and that's central to Benedictine life. But there are other things that are really important. Lectio Divina, that's simply a particular way of reading, visual aid here, reading the Bible. I could give a lot of examples of that, but just take a couple from what I've already said. You have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. If you meditate on that and let the Spirit speak to you through that, then you come to a sort of sense, not of the details, but a sort of awareness of that life which is hidden with Christ and God in the silence. There is that life that's hidden with Christ and God, and obscurely through a glass darkly, to quote St. Paul again, there's an awareness of that life which is hidden with Christ and God. Or again, the things that are seen are temporal, and the things which are not seen are eternal. And that can point us to what is beyond. I give you, Plato said 2 wasn't a real number, so I'll give you a third one, which is from St. Stephen, who's the first martyr, therefore etymologically the first witness to Christ. And he says, I see the heavens open and Jesus standing at the right-hand side of God. That's the Christian mystery, that the heavens are open, that what's eternal, what's true, what's real, what's lasting, actually is available to us. And he sees that, and he sees that Jesus is the right-hand side of God, that Jesus sees that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. He has a direct vision of that, but we can know that through faith. Our faith says the heavens are open, and our faith says Jesus is standing at the right side of God. So we have that, and we absorb it through the scriptures. So that's a very important way. Now, the third thing is more difficult to talk about, because it really is to do altogether with silence. That it's an embarrassment of having to talk about the wonder of silence again. Meister Eckhart said, nothing is so like God as silence. Abbot John Chapman spoke about praying as paying attention to nothing in particular, which is, of course, God. One name for God is the all-possible, or Scripture says nothing is impossible with God. Well, silence is infinite possibility. Silence includes everything. Once you say something, you're in limitation again. If you're silent, you're open to what is infinite, to what is unbounded. And that is an important part of the Benedictine way. We have silent places, we have silent times. It's one of the things that we share with our interns, this silence, this ability just to be silent and to be open to the mystery, to be open to the unsoundable depth. And I just want to mention, I don't like twos, I want to mention a third philosophy, if you count McGilchrist as one, which I think you can in a certain way, and Charles Taylor, and that's Simeon Frank, S.L. Frank, Russian philosopher, beginning of the last century. He wrote this extraordinary, deep, and helpful book called The Unknowable. And his point, I won't go into all the arguments, which are quite complex, but his point is that there is an unsoundable depth of mystery in everything. Rather like Bishop Eric was saying about the human person in response to one of those final questions in that talk earlier today. And that's true of all of creation. Everything's upheld by the presence of God, and therefore there's this deep mystery in everything. And the silence is a way of opening ourselves to the mystery, because it's so easy to settle for the map and not the reality, for the version of something and not the thing itself, for our prejudice and not for the person himself or herself. And silence enables us to be open to that. Now, you might think that's the end of it, but it isn't. There is one thing that is an absolute sine qua non for Christian life, which you'll all be aware of. The great commandment is love of God and love of your neighbour. So forget the philosophers. They're going to talk about a movie now. Have you seen Groundhog Day? Yes, you have. Good, good. So you'll understand what I'm going to say about Benedictine life. Now, you might think, well, that doesn't sound like much fun. You're going to live in this place, which is, you can't really leave it except on special occasions to go to the dentist or whatever. You're going to live in this place and you're going to be with the same people for the rest of your life. What sort of fun is that? Now, that's the attitude of this very urbanly sophisticated weather forecaster in Groundhog Day. He's from New York, where they're very sophisticated. And he's going to this very little hick village where, you know about Candlemas, don't you? There's a proverb, ancient English proverb, which you can find in one of the Jacobean tragedies. If Candlemas be bright, winter will have a second flight. So if it's sunny on the 2nd of February, you're going to get more winter. So this weather forecaster gets sent to this little place, and that proverb has this expression in that little place: if the groundhog can see his own shadow, then there's going to be more winter. So obvious place to send a meteorologist. And he's really hacked off at being sent out of this bright, life-filled city to this tiny little place in the sticks. And it shows. There's this woman he meets, and she's interested in French symbolist poetry. And he says, what do you want to read that for? And then there's this child falls out of a tree and gets very badly hurt, and various other things go wrong. But that's not the end of it, because he wakes up the next day and he's still there. And you all probably already know all of this, but after quite a lot of days like this, the penny drops and he realizes, well, actually, I could make this better. So he starts reading French symbolist poetry, gets on better with the woman, because they don't know it's his second go at it. And he is actually underneath the child when it falls out of the tree and catches it and becomes something of a local hero, and so on. And he gets better and better and better at it. And then one day, he wakes up and it's actually tomorrow. A Benedictine life is like that. You're with the same people, same things come up, same routines, but not quite the same, because you can change your attitude. And then one day, you wake up and it's tomorrow. It's the eternal day. This is the day which the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. It's that day of the resurrection and that life, because through this long process of learning, your attitude has changed and you're ready to enter into eternal life. So that's our goal. So I'd like to thank the people who have been watching us online. Thank you very much.